The Communications and Media Studies program, along with the Murrow Center at the Fletcher School and the Tisch College of Citizenship and Public Service, are very pleased to be sponsoring this year's Murrow Forum. I would also like to acknowledge some of the special guests who are here with us today. We're pleased to have with us in the audience many colleagues from area universities, many members of the press, including our own student television and print reporters. And although he could not be with us here today as he usually is, I bring you all special greetings from Ed and Janet Murrow's son, Casey Murrow. I'd also like to thank some of the people who've worked very hard for months to pull this event together, especially to thank the Tufts University Digital Archives for all of their help, my partners at the Fletcher School and Tisch College for their ongoing support, my amazing staff at the Communications and Media Studies program, and especially Neil Shapiro, whose tireless behind-the-scenes efforts in so many ways helped to shape today's event. And also a very special word of thanks to you, Larry Backow, who at the very first Murrow Forum made an offhand remark that that was the first annual Murrow Forum, and thus set into motion what has, in fact, become our biggest and highest profile yearly event. This is the last Murrow Forum that you'll introduce, Larry, but I do hope that you'll come back in years to come. You'll always have a very special seat at the table, and I promise you that we will save you a front row seat. Let me now ask that everyone in the audience please turn off your cell phones and pagers. I'd like to point out the fire exits that are in the back and in the front here of the auditorium. Edward R. Murrow is among the most renowned figures in the history of American broadcast journalism. His work on radio and television for CBS reshaped the American media landscape. Today, we still look upon Murrow as the standard bearer for much of journalism. His stellar interviewing skills, his sparse eloquence, and his tenacity continue to inspire new legions of journalists in a digital age of reporting. In the Murrow tradition of insightful and incisive interviewing skills, I'm so very pleased to welcome Jonathan Tisch back to campus today as a participant in this year's Murrow Forum. You can read of John's many professional accomplishments in the program, but I do want to underscore his interest in and knowledge of media as both a consumer and a practitioner, and also his tremendous commitment to public service and to Tufts University. These are all qualities that Ed Murrow himself would have greatly valued and appreciated. In his own day, Ed Murrow was a journalistic trailblazer. He covered things that no one before him had covered, and he reported in ways and from places that no one had ever reported. When the prevailing broadcast technology of the day shifted from radio to television, Murrow adapted to the new medium and demonstrated his versatility once again. In these same ways, Katie Couric has also been a journalistic trailblazer. Her many accomplishments and some of the many accolades they have received are well documented in your program. But I'm especially delighted to welcome Katie to Tufts today because in addition to her groundbreaking position in the CBS Anchors Chair, her years of fascinating and insightful interviews, reporting, and news analysis, she is pioneering efforts to use social media in ways that extend the scope and reach of journalism. Let's take a brief look at some of what Katie's done in her extraordinary career.
Can you see?
Yeah. Sorry to have my back to you guys. Technology. May not be the panacea.
Nobody should be tweeting this.
A CBS News exclusive. Is there anything that you wish you had done differently? I'm Katie Couric in Baghdad.
Aren't they going to just reconstitute and move other places?
Move it!
What happened here this morning has shaken the entire nation. A gunman has killed more than 30 people. Uncontrollable wildfires are burning all over Southern California.
Just behind me in the Hudson River, a jetliner actually floating, and one by one, every one of the passengers and crew was rescued.
People everywhere, not just in Minneapolis, are asking why. Nearly every street is an obstacle course of debris and the dead. This is running out, yes?
There's nothing left. That's the last one right here. About to cook.
And then what? Breathe, breathe, breathe. Squeeze my hand. We sat down with 10 presidential candidates. Who is the single most impressive person you've ever met?
It would have to be Nelson Mandela.
It probably would be Ronald Reagan.
What one book would you bring with you to the White House?
I would certainly bring my copy of the Constitution.
What are you most afraid of losing?
My country.
On the eve of the Iowa caucuses, I'm Katie Couric in New Hampshire. An update on the Pennsylvania primary. Polls have just closed in Virginia. 24 states voting, and the polls are now closed in 18 of them. One more time, not to belabor the point, specific examples of pushing for more regulation.
I'll try to find you some and I'll bring them to you.
When Valerie Plame's identity was published, Nora Jones has sold more outlooks treated for bipolar disorder. Condoleezza Rice is one of the chief architects. Lauren Axelrod is one of nearly 3 million Americans living with epilepsy. All they heard was the air is safe.
I don't want that to be my legacy.
Have you ever used steroids?
No.
President, Vice Presidents, First Lady, Second Lady, family members,
So this is where they are at all times?
right here.
The latest debate in Washington is, how long will Emmanuel be in the job?
I would like to stay as long as the President wants me.
So no plans of vacating the premises anytime
We're not
soon?
ordering any boxes yet.
We met the crew inside a U.S. Airways hangar. Did you realize right away the engines are failing?
I knew immediately that it was very serious.
President Bush, thanks again.
Thank you.
Accepted the debate commission title.
So this is the shell of the South Tower, Tower number 2, that was hit by the second plane.
This was a real special meeting.
This is clean as a whistle. This is a perfectly normal examination.
Yeah, this is we're moving into Eastern New Orleans.
Then what happened?
Everybody was really shocked.
Sure, the neighborhood's a lot better than we were doing before.
You not only had more troops, but you also had a different approach.
Who's to say you're reading the tea leaves accurately now?
Katie, you are truly a role model for our students here at Tufts. I don't think I've ever had the pleasure of introducing someone who, in the last few days, has been a clue in the Wall Street Journal crossword puzzle on Friday, a topic on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me on Saturday, the subject of an article in the New York Times Magazine on Sunday, and a front-page New York Times story today. But it is indeed a pleasure to introduce you, and we're so very honored to have you with us here today at Tufts.
Julie, thank you for those very kind introductions. Katie, welcome to Tufts University.
Thank you,
We're
John.
thrilled that you're here. Did you feel like this was a bit of This Is Your Life in 2 minutes or
Looking
less?
for Ralph Edwards. Watching that, it's actually incredibly moving for me because I feel so privileged that I have had such a front row seat to history and have had the honor of interviewing so many people and also, taking the American people or whoever's watching through so many traumatic and uplifting world events, from 9/11 and Columbine to that heroic landing by Sully Sullenberger. So it is quite, I know I get quite emotional when I see that. I feel so fortunate.
And to combine that with a forum that is named after the great Edward R. Murrow,
Yeah,
and you and I had a chance to see some of his old writings and his books, and And to think about it, somebody who was doing what you were doing, but decades ago in a very different time. How does it make you feel? I know you spend a lot of time on college campuses. You give graduation speeches. I think you're going to be across the river in June at BU.
They asked, you didn't.
Do you enjoy coming on college campuses and having an opportunity to talk to the future leaders, the future thought makers of our next generation?
It's a thrill. I mean, even to see all these fresh young faces. I'm a little jealous, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, I think it's a real inspiration for me. I've done many, well, not many, probably 10 graduation addresses.
You've done Princeton.
I did the class day address at Princeton, which is sort of the lighthearted. General Petraeus actually gave the commencement address that year.
It's a good daily double. Kirk and Petraeus.
And, you know, yes, at several universities. And I take it very, very seriously because I know a lot of the students may not be listening, may be a little hungover. But, you know, I really try my best to impart something that's helpful and useful and that they can take with them, you know, hopefully as they sort of set out on their journey, which is so exciting and also intimidating for people who are graduating now and going out into a very complicated, competitive world. And so it's something I really do enjoy, and it's actually sort of the genesis of this book. I know that we don't have to spend the whole time talking about this book.
But going back a few years to your years as an undergraduate at the University of Virginia, you started working on the college newspaper.
That's right.
Did you see, when you think back, was that the moment where you said, I possibly might want to make this a career? I know that your father was a journalist. He was one of your very early mentors. Give us a sense of your thinking back when you were an undergrad.
Well, I have always loved to write. You know, I think some people just really get a lot of joy out of writing, and I love words. And when I was young, I remember feeling so full of pride when my 8th grade English teacher read my essay in front of the class. And I think my dad is an excellent writer, and as you said, he's a former journalist. He covered politics for the Atlanta Constitution. He was editor of his school paper at Mercer in Macon, Georgia, and also worked for the Macon Telegraph, and then later worked for United Press. And I think I really inherited his passion for writing and his, although my mom is also very intellectually curious, but also I think I got that from both my parents. So my dad encouraged me. I wasn't really strong in math. Like many, unfortunately, women of my generation, we weren't encouraged to do that much in math. And I remember when Miss Lowry, my 1st grade teacher, gave me a 2 instead of a 1 in math, which was the equivalent to a B instead of an A. I ran home from the bus stop in hysterics, and I think it made me hate math for the rest of my life. And, but I think I've always been able to write fairly well and write well under pressure. I think my years of being a champion procrastinator served me well. So when I got to college, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I at one point thought I wanted to get into the creative side of advertising, but my dad helped me become an intern at some radio stations in Washington while I was at the University of Virginia. I wrote for the Cavalier Daily. And so because I love people, I like connecting with people, I'm curious about a lot of things, and I enjoy writing under pressure, I thought, hey, ding, 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 maybe journalism would be a good profession for me. So I started out and I thought, well, if I could get into television, that might be exciting as well. So that's really how it unfolded.
And you stayed in Washington. Your first job was at the ABC affiliate?
Yeah, and it was hard.
DC?
It was hard getting my foot in the door, and I talk about that in the book because I know that for many of you, it's going to be frustrating as you try to get a job, and now in this internet age, you kind of send a resume and you feel like it's just being swallowed up into some big black hole and you never hear from people again. But you know, I tell a story in there about my mom. I was trying to get a job, and then I went to the beach to become a waitress for the summer because I had never done something fun during the summer. I had always worked. And so I came back to Arlington, Virginia, where I grew up, and I said to my mom, can you just take me down to the ABC bureau because I want to find out what the heck is going on with my entry-level position there. And I was able to weasel my way up into the newsroom by telling the security guard that I needed to talk to the executive producer, whose name was Davy Newman. And Davy Newman's twin brother, Steve and Eddie Newman, went to high school with my sister Kiki, and I knew Davy Newman's daughter. Davy Newman's niece, Julie Newman, was a good friend of mine from up the street. So I said, "Hi, Davy, it's Katie Couric. You don't know me, but I just then repeated all what I just told you." And he's like, "Oh, come on up." So this really officious, really not very nice secretary of the assistant bureau chief, Kevin Delaney, sort of just watched helplessly as I kind of walked into Kevin Delaney's office, and I told him how I'd finagled my way up to the newsroom, and he said, "Well, I'm very impressed," and he moved my resume, I think, from the bottom of the pile to the top, and about 2 weeks later I was called and said I could be a desk assistant at ABC News, where I Xeroxed and made coffee and got Frank Reynolds ham sandwiches on a regular basis. So it was a very challenging job, but really important.
The whole notion of tenacity you actually talk about in the book, about how you really have to apply yourself and make sure that people notice you. And it was interesting, Nancy Pelosi, the leader, was on campus on Friday, and one of the questions that she answered was about writing. Somebody said to her, Ms. Leader, what are the skills you need today? And first and foremost, she said you have to be a good writer and a good listener. And I know that you've encompassed both of those in your career,
Yeah,
those skills.
I think writing is critically important, and I think whenever you can express yourself well, it's frustrating sometimes to realize it can be difficult to find people who are really good writers. So that's a skill that I would definitely encourage everybody, whether they're in college or beyond, to continue working on. Because it's so critical really in any field, in any endeavor.
We'll get into some of the new technologies that we encompass into our lives every day in a moment, but when I think back at your career as things were happening and unfolding, we didn't quite understand them. You were at CNN in its very early incarnation.
That's
and
right.
People were unclear whether it was going to work. Didn't they call it the chicken noodle news?
Yeah, they called it chicken noodle news, yeah. And I actually left ABC and went to CNN because at ABC it was quite, established and bureaucratic, and you had to work your way up, and quite frankly, there weren't that many women in key positions. So I thought, wow, wouldn't this be great to go to CNN, this fledgling news organization, because they didn't have unions at the time. You sort of could do anything, and you'd have to serve a variety of roles. And I remember Carl Bernstein, who was the bureau chief of ABC, took me into his office and said, why are you going to the minor leagues when you're here at the major leagues? And I said, yes, Mr. Bernstein, but I think I need to learn how to play baseball first. And he was like, I know, where did I get the nerve to be like that? But he was like, oh, okay. Everybody talks the same in my past. Like Walter Brennan, for some reason. I don't know where that's coming from, but anyway.
And then the rest of your career has been chronicled so many times, but just to touch on some what I think are important moments, obviously the transition to NBC, 1998, to become a deputy Pentagon reporter, to get into the Peacock network. And when I mentioned your father being a mentor, one of your other mentors was also at NBC, and that was Tim Russert. And what was Tim's importance in your life? What did you learn from Tim?
Well, Tim was an incredibly honorable, decent person. And talk about tenacity. He was absolutely tenacious, but I think you always got a sense with Tim, he really wanted to get to the real story, to the bottom of what was happening, and I think he did so in a respectful way, but in a strong way. He was persistent. And I can't believe that Tim's not here. I think his loss is so felt by everyone in the journalism community, and I think by the country as well, because I think he just emanated decency. And Tim, I was working at WRC, which was the NBC station in Washington, covering Marion Barry and fires and all sorts of local stories on the news. And I got a call saying that Tim Russert wanted to see me. Well, you can imagine, I was pretty excited about that. And he said that he admired my tenacity and my reporting, and he wanted to know if I'd be interested in becoming the deputy Pentagon correspondent for the network. And it was always my dream to be a network correspondent. That was really my highest ambition, to cover a big national beat. And so I was thrilled, to say the least. And he said, do you think you could do this? And I said, yeah, I think I can. And so that's what I ended up doing, and he was very, very supportive. one of the few early supporters of me professionally. I had many, many detractors early on, people who said they never wanted to see me on the air again. The president of CNN, thanks so much. And actually, I kid him about that. And one time I did the local cut-ins for WRC because I thought, well, I would like to anchor just to learn how to anchor so I could be, have more skills under my belt. So I got to the NBC station early one morning, and I was running my own prompter. I had no idea what I was doing, back timing, cutting the tape to go with the VO. And I kept talking long after they'd gone to a commercial break. And so my news director, I said, could I do that again? And he said, well, maybe if you go to a really, 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 really small market somewhere, you could do that again. So when I anchored the weekend evening news for Garrett Utley about 6 months later, I saw him in the hallway because NBC and WRC shared a building. And I said, remember your advice to go to a really, 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 really small market? I said, is the nation small enough for you?
Good for you. Well, that led into the Today Show, 15 years at the Today Show. And I love Matt Lauer's description of your tenure, the program that you shared with him. Matt said that Katie is a combination of Lucille Ball, and certainly appropriate for this forum, combination of Lucille Ball and Edward R. Murrow. And really describes your time there because it was a focus on the hard news, but also as the hours went on, got to be a little bit softer. Was that a very enjoyable period to be able to combine so many interests of yours in a 2-hour broadcast?
It was, I think sometimes people associate my tenure there with the lighter moments because I did, dress up like Peter Pan and fly across the plaza and do some other things like that. But, I look back at my body of work at the Today Show, and I am just so proud of some of the interviews I've done, while I was there, from Yasser Arafat to Lee Iacocca. I remember interviewing David Duke, the avowed racist, and quoting back to him some of his statements like Jews belong in the ash bin of society or something, and just really holding his feet to the fire. And I got a lovely letter from Frank Rich, which is one of my most treasured possessions, talking about how much he appreciated that I didn't let David Duke roll me over and that I kept at him. And I remember my dad called me after the show because I used to get a lot of advice from him, and I still do. He's 90 and still with us, and I feel so blessed about that. But after the David Duke interview, my dad called me and said, Edward R. Murrow would be really proud of that interview. So that was quite an endorsement by my father, who I respect so much.
And very appropriate. And then obviously we know about the transition to CBS, where we've seen some of your most recent work and the range of interviews there, from Captain Sullenberger to Alex Rodriguez, when he told you that no, he in fact had never taken steroids, which did not prove to be reality.
Yeah, I think he was going like this behind his back.
I know some people have gotten married that way.
He wrote me an apology note, actually, after that interview.
And 2 Edward R. Murrow Awards for your work at CBS. But one of the clips that we saw, many people have that seared in their memory as a moment where Katie Couric really might have changed the course of politics in our country and changed the course of an election, and that has become to be known as the Couric interview, Couric interviews with Sarah Palin. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because the interviews became so visible, certainly on your CBS Evening News, but then they lived on the internet and YouTube and through Facebook. Do you think they would have been as effective? Do you think they would have been as well watched if we weren't entering that generation of social media that took them to a whole nother level?
No, I think that's true. When things live in perpetuity on the internet, for better or for worse in some cases, I think that's gotten many, many views online, in the millions, well into the millions. And I think that, I think that opens up a conversation about the whole changing landscape of the media in terms of people watch things when they want to watch them, and gone are the days where the whole family gathered around the dinner table and watched the evening news. I think so. We have the CBS Evening News online. We have a lot of the interviews that I've done and other correspondents have done online. But I think certainly that allowed people to share it and to view it repeatedly in some cases. So I think certainly that added to the impact of that interview had it just run alone on the CBS Evening News.
Did you have a sense while you were doing the interview that these were going to be very important in terms of the McCain-Palin candidacy for president and vice president?
You know, I wasn't sure, John, because I think in this day and age, the country is so polarized and people view things through their own unique and established prisms. And I thought what it might do would be the people who were not drawn to her would be less drawn, and the people who were drawn to her would be more drawn. I wasn't really sure of the impact. You know, and my goal was really she had done so few interviews, and primarily network anchors. Charlie Gibson had done something, Sean Hannity had done something, and then it was my turn to do something. And so I think there was a lot that wasn't known about Governor Palin, so I wanted it to be revealing, and I wanted to hear her positions. I thought it was important to solicit her positions on a variety of policy issues. She had been at the UN that day, so obviously that opened up a conversation about foreign policy. And then the next week we went to Ohio, and that opened up a conversation about more domestic issues. And it's sort of amusing to me that we talked about so many things from a surge working in Iraq versus Afghanistan. We talked about the financial crisis because that had reached kind of the zenith at that period of time, and that's when Senator McCain suspended his campaign. So I always find it kind of interesting that the question everybody seems to remember is a completely off-the-cuff question that I asked her as we were doing a walk and talk, which are kind of awkward. You've got a camera there, you have a finite period of time, like 40 seconds, to kind of converse with somebody, and it's just really visual as much as anything. And that's when I asked her, I was curious because she is very, very strong in her ideology, what shaped her in terms of her political philosophy. So that's when I asked her what kind of books and what kind of newspapers and magazines before she was tapped she read on a regular basis that helped shape her particular political views. So it's interesting that that's the question that is so often repeated when that interview is mentioned.
But as you say, it now lives on forever and ever and ever. You mentioned the polarization of politics in our country, people on either side of many issues, and you look at Fox and you look at MSNBC. How do you feel about the media's role in informing us about our politics, and what your role as a journalist to sort of stay in the center, as I know you do, as opposed to what you're seeing in some of these other networks that are going to one side or the other?
Well, I think that obviously sort of advocacy journalism serves a role. I think that the thing that a lot of people fear is that if you just watch programs that reflect your own point of view and basically reinforce what you're thinking, that it further polarizes the country, that you can't sort of understand someone else's point of view. So if you have a steady diet of just one media outlet that again confirms your thinking, that doesn't necessarily encourage a healthy dialogue and any kind of conciliatory measures and any kind of compromise. And so, I think they're interesting and entertaining and certainly, have a place, as I said, in someone's daily news diet. But I think that it's important to watch people you don't agree with, and it's also important, I think, to get someone who is ultimately, I guess there are different versions of the truth. I don't like sort of middle-of-the-road journalism that says on one hand this, on the other hand that, because ultimately we should be searching for the truth and what the situation really is. But I think everyone has a unique philosophy, and in the case of Democrats and Republicans, sometimes there are just complete, honest differences about the role they see government should take in our society, and we have to respect that as well. But I think somehow that it has discouraged kind of civil discourse in a way, which I consider in this day and age somewhat of an oxymoron. Certainly moderate Republicans are harder to find, as are some moderate Democrats. And so I think, I can't say it's responsible for the polarization, but I think it adds to it in some ways.
And as you are reporting, as you are doing your job, I think back once again to Edward R. Murrow, and he would be in London reporting on World War II, and it would take days, weeks for his reports to get back to the people in our country. anything that you report now happens instantaneously. You have a satellite link and we see it as you are envisioning the news. And you put yourself in a lot of difficult situations. You and your colleagues put yourself in a lot of difficult situations, and you've been to Egypt and you've been to Tahrir Square and you've covered the BP oil, I mean, all these major events, and you just got back from Iraq.
Yes.
What's your sense of weighing the risk, the personal risk, versus your responsibility to be a reporter and report on events as they are unfolding immediately in this world where we see things like that?
Well, obviously, you know, I can take my responsibility very seriously and try to go and be on the scene, because I think a firsthand perspective and being an eyewitness to history is really irreplaceable in terms of what you're observing, and certainly that was the case with the BP oil spill, you know, to actually reach down and lift up the muck that's sort of the consistency of chocolate pudding, and to see the beautiful wildlife and how it's affecting the estuaries and the ecosystem there. You know, you can't really replace an experience like that, or going to Tahrir Square and seeing this jubilant atmosphere suddenly turn on a dime the next day when pro-Mubarak supporters filed in there, and you knew that it was a powder keg just waiting to go off, and certainly it did. So I try to be responsible, to be honest with you. I mean, I think because I am a single parent, I try to be thoughtful about the decisions I make. I try to exercise caution when necessary, because I don't want my daughters to be orphans. And but I also try to, whenever I can, whenever it's possible, to be on the scene of a variety of different world events when I can. But I also, you know, we have amazing correspondents stationed all over the world, and they're so gifted and fantastic at what they do. People like Mark Phillips and, you know, all kinds, Lara Logan, who's incredibly courageous. And so this is what they do really, really well as well, and it's good for them to have that opportunity to share their story with the world.
Have there been moments where you have been fearful, where you were concerned about a
Yes.
situation?
I think probably the most fearful I've been was when I was recently in Egypt, because I was there during those critical 2 days, and as I said, Tahrir Square just turned on a dime into a very, very frightening setting, where there were, you know, you saw the scenes of the horses and the camels, and people were throwing rocks and getting shot, and then the next day, you know, they had all these checkpoints set up, and we didn't know whether they would be pro-Mubarak supporters who were so angry that the news media was sending these messages and these images all over the world, or they would be pro-democracy or anti-Mubarak people. So I think that drive from the hotel to the airport was one of the scariest drives of my life, because I just didn't know what was going to happen. And as we read later, a lot of reporters were being abused, and you know, a lot of print reporters and photographers were having their cameras and they were getting roughed up, and we saw what happened to Anderson Cooper, and as I mentioned, what happened later to Lara Logan. So I think this mob mentality was a very frightening thing to experience, because you just didn't know what to expect.
Would it ever stop you from covering another story? Where you were asked to be parachuted into the center of a situation?
I think I would. I do it on a case-by-case basis. I try to evaluate the situation and figure out, you know, what it's like and what I'll be facing. But it's something I definitely think about. I don't do it impulsively. I just, you know, I obviously try to consider that when I'm making decisions.
And as witnessed by the fact you just have returned from Iraq, you were there for a couple days with Secretary of Defense Gates.
That's right.
What was that trip like?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I went and covered the surge in 2007 when that complement of 30,000 additional troops were deployed to Iraq, and it's such a different scene there now. It's almost, you know, I think there's obviously sporadic violence. I think 60 people were killed in Couric last week, and I think Al-Qaeda is launching some offensive attacks to according to Secretary Gates, to kind of try to deal with the progress that's being made in terms of the safety of the streets and the political process. But it was very interesting. 47,000 U.S. troops are still there. They're saying that if the Iraqi government requests them to stay longer than the deadline of the end of the year, that's something they'll consider, a fraction of the troops, but nonetheless a U.S. presence. So it's just very interesting to see Iraq unfold. And, you know, Secretary Gates has said whether we're successful here will always be clouded by the fact that the reasons we went to war were never valid or weren't valid. You know, having said that, it seems like there is a nascent democracy developing in Iraq, and the situation is very, very different than it was in 2007 when I was there, and you could hear mortar fire and all sorts of things going on at night, and it was a little unsettling.
I'm sure. There's a wonderful clip of you from 1994, and you're sitting on the Today Show sofa with Bryant Gumbel. I'm not sure.
I know what you're going to say.
It's
This
the lead
is actually
it's the
funny.
lead into the future. And you're sitting there with Bryant Gumbel, and I'm not sure that it was actually on air, as I remember.
It was during a co-op,
right, it
which
was-
is when the local news takes over and we just have to BS for 5 minutes. And
So,
this was an
so
embarrassing
Bryant
moment of
and
BSing.
Katie are sitting there, context, 1994, and they're saying, well, what does that little A in a circle mean?
No, what is the internet? What
Right,
is that
what is the internet? And then there's
thing?
something about an A and a dot, and
I was saying, I think if the A is about or around.
Right. Now, I only mention it because in the...
Before you laugh too much, I'd like to take you all back
Right,
to
well,
1994
I'm
and
not...
see if Bill Gates is
Right.
in here.
Well, it came up in a conversation you had with Bill Gates. I
Yeah,
believe.
yeah.
I know and when you were interviewing Bill Gates on your website. I lay it out there because in the scheme of life, in terms of going back to the Gutenberg Bible when we first started to get our information a little bit quicker, 17 years is not a long time. And when we think about what's happened since Bryant and you had that conversation, which we can now laugh about, it happened in a nanosecond. So here we are 17 years later. You have some 200,000 followers on Twitter.
Thank you, it's 175, but thank you for giving, maybe after this.
After this,
At Katie Couric, everybody, come on.
after this, it's 200,000 and growing. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Obviously, we now live in a very rapidly changing world. We are guided by what's happening in terms of information flow. How does that affect what you do? You've broadened how you deliver your message because it's not just 22 minutes Monday through Friday. You have used technology to your advantage to get out what you think is important for your viewers and readers to learn about. Tell me the process that you've gone through yourself, maybe since you had that moment with Brian 17 years ago.
I've grown since then, John. You know, I've really tried to embrace new media. I think there are a lot of people in traditional media who have been sort of intimidated by it or threatened by it. And I have seen that, you know, this is not only the future, this is the present. And so I have to say my learning curve is fairly steep. You know, for people like my 15-year-old daughter, I just marvel when I see her do all the things that she does. And you know, college students today, of course, although it does annoy me. I went to UVA to look at that school with my daughter Ellie, and all these students, and Larry Sabato, do you guys know Larry Sabato, political professor at UVA, and he's on television. They were all ordering stuff from J. Crew, and it made me so mad. I think they shouldn't allow students to use computers in the classroom because, no, seriously, I thought it was so
instead
rude.
of taking notes about
They weren't taking notes. They
physics?
were looking, you know, at all these different websites. These girls were ordering dresses. And I wanted to say, hey, listen. I was going to be the hall monitor. But, yeah, I think they shouldn't. I don't know. I know that you can take notes, obviously, but I just think that there should be some rule that you can't be, you know, going to different websites during your classes. Thank you. I'm such a mother. But anyway, so I decided to really embrace it because one of the things I found for me is I like being connected to viewers. I like being connected to the people who are watching, who are engaged in the world around them. And things like Twitter and Facebook have given me an avenue to have conversations. I find out not only what other people are thinking, I find out about stories that they care about. For quite some time, especially during the Gulf oil spill, I would solicit questions on Twitter and say, what would you like to know? And some of the best questions came from there, rather than questions that I think when you cover a story day in and day out, sometimes you forget to ask the obvious question, like how much oil is in there? And so I've tried to really be forward thinking in terms of my digital footprint, if you will. And then I do a web show called @Couric, and that was really for selfish reasons, because CBS doesn't have a cable property, and because I do love meeting and talking to interesting people. I thought, well, the internet, that's endless real estate. So I started doing that once a week, and I've done, it's been really great because it's satisfied a need in me to have these longer conversations that are more natural and spontaneous and unedited. If I do an interview on the evening news, it's like 2 minutes long, and it's sort of like I have to go, so what do you think Richard has about the situation in Libya? I'm like, speak faster. And so this is just an opportunity to have a more relaxed, casual conversation, so I've taken advantage of that, and I did that primarily, as I said, for selfish reasons.
Do you think we run the risk as the individuals, the Americans, on an international basis, global basis, run the risk of seeing things that get to us too quickly that might be unfiltered, that might be inaccurate?
Yeah, well, I've often said that sometimes immediacy is trumping accuracy on the internet. Oh, hello. Is this mood lighting? Anyway. Let's talk about something else, John. Okay, sorry.
So what do you do?
Back to the internet.
Right. What do you want to do at night in Iraq?
Katie After Hours. We just had a little moment there.
That's a different audience, a different show.
Yeah, exactly. Different school.
Different cable channel.
Yeah. But, I do think that people are learning. I was reading recently about a reporter at the Washington Post who is a very respected reporter who I used to cover local stories with, who I worked with when I was working in Washington, named Sari Horowitz, a really, really wonderful person. I haven't seen her for years. But she was writing a piece about Gabby Giffords and basically lifted a lot of the material from the Arizona Republic. And I think part of the problem was that she was under so much pressure to feed the beast online, and then it was sandwiched between 2 separate interviews she had. And it was completely, according to everyone, out of character for her to do it. But I think what it made everyone realize, and Sari's won a Pulitzer Prize, that everybody once in a while needs to take a step back. And this, this anxiety or this need to get things out there right away, you need to say, well, wait a second, let's confirm this, or wait a second, I can't do this, I'm sorry, I know my job depends on it, but it's important, the quality of my work is critically important. So, we saw that with Shirley Sherrod and how things get twisted and taken out of context online until you looked at the whole interview, and what she said was something altogether different than what it was being claimed she said. So I think there are dangers, and I think, it's a relatively new instrument, and it's an incredible, I marvel at what you can do with this new technology, but I think it also that sometimes our values don't keep pace with the immediacy. If you see some of the ways it's been abused with, the boy in the college student who was videotaped and all sorts of other situations where it's
committing suicide.
Yes, exactly, where it's misused. So I think, we have to be respectful of this incredibly powerful tool and learn how to best use it. And I still think we've got our training wheels on when it comes to that, in some ways.
We have the Couric interviews, but then we also have the Couric effect. And you were on the cover of Time magazine a few years back. Your husband, Jay, passed away in the year 2000. And you have made it an integral part of your life to educate people about colorectal cancer. You lost your sister to pancreatic cancer. Mm-hmm. You have also championed that cause. I know these are issues that are vitally important to you. And tell me about the process of finding the avenue for you to express what you want to do to honor your late husband, honor your late sister, but also save the lives of as many Americans as you can.
Well, it's certainly, the most gratifying work I've ever done, far and away. I was at a book signing at the bookstore, and one of the ladies said, because of you, I got my colonoscopy, and every time I get it, I think of you. And I said, how nice. I think. And, I think that you know, on a serious note, I got a very, very painful and difficult education about colorectal cancer when Jay got sick.
I said 2000,
That's
but
all
98,
right. That's
98.
okay.
I apologize.
You know, my husband was 41 years old, very healthy, you know, relatively young person, and it was just the shock of shocks to hear that he had been diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, and the diagnosis was so bleak, and it was all over his liver, and it was a very scary, life-shattering time. And I think my repertorial instincts emerged, and I tried to do as much research as I could. I called, you know, hospitals in Israel or pharmaceutical companies all over the country, and I think what I quickly discovered is, you know, nobody is immune to this kind of heartache and pain. So I think because I felt so powerless in dealing with Jay's illness, and he was sick for 9 months before he died, afterwards I felt so frustrated, because I think if you're a can-do person and you can do nothing, nothing is worse than that. So that's when I decided that it was too late for Jay and for our girls and for me, but I could educate the public, and I could hopefully save some people from the same fate and save families from the same fate. So it came from the purest place in my being. And so that's why I decided, I went to Jeff Zucker, who was then the executive producer of the Evening News, who ironically had his own experience with colon cancer as an even younger man and had been cured, which is wonderful. But I asked him, you know, can I do a colonoscopy? It wasn't live, I'm not that brave, by the way, but could I have a colonoscopy, because so many people don't comply with the guidelines, and I'd like to destigmatize it and tell people it's not that bad. And so that's what I did, and you know, I feel that it really did have an impact. A lot of doctors say when they have their sheet referred by, they write my name. And, you know, somebody once sent me an x-ray of his colon. It's like, thanks for sharing. And people
Sharing is caring.
They do give me all sorts of details about their gastrointestinal systems, which I appreciate. But really, you know, it has such a high cure rate. It's a better than 90% cure rate if it's detected early. The colon, believe it or not, is this wonderful thing because it keeps cancer localized. And once it permeates the colon and becomes systemic disease, that's when it's much more challenging. But if you can get a precancerous polyp or even a cancerous polyp removed before it creates all sorts of problems, you know, it saves your life. I mean, what's more important than that? So I just got a colonoscopy about 2 weeks ago because I was due. You know, I'm not used to not doing it on television, but I thought, well, I better go do this.
You have it with you? We can hold it up.
No. But I did a little thing on YouTube, if you guys want to check it out. It's sort of funny, where I got my doctor to say, no, we didn't find anything, but we did find this feather duster, this Batman action figure, and a lipstick. I said, I've been looking everywhere for that lipstick. But, you know, you try to have a sense of humor about it, because I'm telling you, it's not that fun, but it's a lot more fun than being diagnosed with full-out colon cancer. So if I can give you any gift today, it's to tell the people you love. It's the second leading cancer killer of men and women in this country. 130,000 people are diagnosed every single year. So if you haven't been screened and you're 50 or older, or you have a family history and you're even younger, or you know someone and love someone, tell them to get their butt to the doctors. That's what I say.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
You've even taken it to an extent where you have partnered with your competitors. Stand Up to Cancer.
Yeah.
Diane Sawyer.
That's right,
Brian
Diane
Williams.
and Brian.
And so tell me the thinking when you call your two competitors, who I know you're friends with, and say, we need to use our ability to spread a message, to really deal head on with this plague in our country called cancer. That's I assume, the good use of using your fame and your pulpit?
Well, I've tried to do that throughout my career, you know, because I feel like I have this extraordinary opportunity to inform the public or to shed light on an issue. And so I was feeling guilty. I was feeling like I was paying too much attention to just colons. So I said to my friend Lisa Paulson, who's head of the Entertainment Industry Foundation, who really provided the infrastructure for my work, you know, I think we need to do more about cancer in general because funding has decreased and it's very, very difficult to get federal funding for research grants. And of course, these scientists spend months and months doing the research grants, but only 1 out of 10 is actually federally funded. And you know, 1 person dies of cancer every minute in this country, and it's such a scourge. And I thought, what could we do to galvanize so many people who are affected by this disease, either through a loved one or their own experiences? What could we do? And at the same time, Sherry Lansing and some women in California, Laura Ziskin, who's a great producer, who was herself going through cancer, we said, you know, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. And we decided, what could we do to get everybody together? So it was all about collaboration. And we got all the networks and then the second go round, a lot of cable outlets to run Stand Up to Cancer. We've raised $180 million so far. And the whole idea of collaboration extends into how the research is conducted, because we have dream teams where somebody will be from Harvard, will be working with MD Anderson, will be working with a biotech firm, and they'll pool their resources because, you know, if 2 heads are better than 1, 10 heads are better than 2. And it's incredible how much progress we're seeing. You know, they're studying epigenetics and all sorts of different new therapies. And, you know, it is so exciting because, you know, we're making great progress. But I think with the technology and all the resources available to us as a country and really in the world, we're on the cusp of so many exciting discoveries that if they can't cure cancer, can extend lives. And so I'm very passionate about that work, and I'm really proud of what we've been able to accomplish, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we'll be able to do in the future.
And because you have a lot of energy and lots of ideas and want to really help people in their lives, your new book.
Thank you for mentioning
Funny how I
that,
happen to
John.
have a copy, but I did read it over the weekend. Your new book is coming out tomorrow, The Best Advice I Ever Got. And in the introduction, you write about how you needed help at some dark times in your life, and if I can just quote a few sentences. How do you keep going when you want to curl up into a ball and never leave the bedroom? How do you squeeze all the joy out of life while dealing with all the messy parts? How can you find a calling that fills you up, gives you a sense of purpose and your life meaning, and doesn't leave you feeling full of regret and remorse? So you've appreciated when people have come to you with important advice. What was the impetus for you to sort of spread this message to so many more through a book like this?
Well, I was giving the graduation address last year at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland because Sandy Markowitz, who's this incredibly brilliant cancer researcher who does a lot of genetic research on colon cancer, asked me, and I said, of course. And as I mentioned, I'd given a lot of graduation addresses, and I sort of was getting ODing on my own story. And so I reached out to some people I had the pleasure and privilege of interviewing through the years and said, if you had to talk to some people, young people, about your life and about what you've learned, what do you think you would tell them? What would you share with them? Because, you know, first of all, I thought it was cool that I have access to these people a little bit. Warren Buffett told me to go jump in a lake, not really, but he didn't do it. And that I you know, was able to reach out, and I got these extraordinary answers from a number of people, from Queen Rania and Sheryl Crow, General Odierno, and all sorts of people I'd met along the way. And Eric Schmidt from Google, who went to my high school. So I thought, wow, this is so great. These people have such extraordinary things to share. Wouldn't it be great to be able to give this to someone and say, here's some things that these people went through that might inspire you or comfort you or help you along the way. So I decided I would go to Random House, where a friend of mine is an editor, Susan Mercandetti. I said, do you think people would be interested in this? And she said, yeah, I do. So I got ultimately 116 people to contribute, and Michelle Kwan, who's here, actually wrote an essay about her coach teaching her how to fall when she was little, and how sort of what a metaphor that is for her life and some of her performances through the years. I've known Michelle for a long time, covering the Olympics. In fact, she taught me how to skate a little bit. very little. But so I'm really excited about the book, and the thing that I'm most excited about is that any proceeds that I make go to Scholarship America, which is the sort of the oldest scholarship fund in this country. It was established in 1958. I think they've given $2.4 billion to 1.7 million students. So I thought this would be an ideal way to pay it forward, to help some kids in this, especially in this current economic environment, to be able to afford to go to college, and to one day, as I write, contribute to a book like this. So I feel like, I'm trying to do as much as I can while I can, because I feel like I've been blessed with this extraordinary career, and I want to be able to use it in a positive way. And what I like about this book is, there's so much snarkiness out there, and negativity and nastiness and cynicism. It's nice to read some things that are actually just earnest and honest, and remind us of the values that I think we really do need to hold dear, about integrity and honesty and being able to pick yourself up after you fail. And I think there's some very consistent themes, which I think I find interesting in terms of all successful people, and being able to deal with failure, and being able to learn how to be patient, and the importance of making an imprint on the wider world. So I'm really proud of it. I'm proud of, I was just basically the wrangler. I write some introductions, but I'm just proud of all the people who participated. And I hope it will live on, because every day I think I should have asked so-and-so to write something, because they're like John Tisch, for example. I told John the paperback.
Well,
but anyway, I'm really proud of it, and I hope you will find some kind of inspiration, whether you're graduating from college or just kind of taking stock of your life. I really enjoyed reading them.
the book is called, as I mentioned, The Best Advice I Ever Got. What's the best advice that you've ever given?
Oh, well, I think I've learned a lot through the years, and I don't know whether it's the best, but, I think my husband used to say cliches are cliches for a reason, because there's a certain essential truth to cliches, many of them. Like the early bird catches the worm, which Mike Bloomberg talks about, getting to the office before everybody else when he was in real estate, and how he would answer all the calls and get all the clients. And later, I think when he was at Salomon Brothers, I can't remember where.
He was at Salomon Brothers.
He got there extra early, and the advantage there was he got to know the other guy who got there extra early, and that was the CEO. So, but I think to thine own self be true is something I tell people, and it's something that I remind myself. There's a lot of noise out there, passing judgment and kind of telling you what to do, or how you should think, or how you should feel, or what your role should be. And I try to encourage people to listen to their inner heart, and I think that's reflected. Tom Friedman writes about that in the book, about being an untouchable, loving what you do, and being untouchable, because you can't replace someone with a certain amount of passion. So, there's so much advice that I would give to somebody. A lot of it is in here, but I think kind of knowing yourself and staying strong, and I think that's really, really important. There's a lot of other things I would tell my daughters about, trying to take risks and learning from failure, and being the man in the arena, as Teddy Roosevelt wrote in his speech. But gee, there are a lot of things, but I guess, and also don't let the turkeys get you down. I mentioned that earlier to someone, because as I said, there are a lot of naysayers out there, and as Linda Ellerby says, some days you're the statue and some days you're the pigeon. And it's a lot more fun being the pigeon, I tell you.
I want to leave a couple minutes for a few questions from the audience, but I couldn't be true to the namesake of this symposium, Edward R. Murrow, unless I ask you a couple questions about. We're reading about you a lot, Katie.
I'm sorry, it's so boring.
And it's over just today. It's the Wall Street Journal. It's the New York Times. It is the New York Post. There is much conjecture about what you might be doing when your contract is up at CBS. And so I think your contract's up like June 4th or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So let's
did
just
you know
make
that?
believe it's June 5th,
Uh-huh.
and you walk out of your building in New York and you hail a taxi.
Take me to the beach.
Well, that was going to be my question: is where are you telling the taxi driver to take you on June 5th?
I do not know, and that is the honest truth. I'm figuring out sort of what I'm going to be doing, and I'm excited about the future and weighing some options. And I'm right in the thick of it. This was sort of an interesting timing for me. And it is disconcerting to be just minding your own business, reading the paper, and like you're like, oh, oh my God. You see your name, it's like, ah. But I'm figuring it out right now. And so I would like to break a big news story here at Tufts, but I'm not able to, so.
Full-time role on Glee?
I'm replacing Sue Sylvester.
There we go, breaking news. But there's also been a little bit of conjecture that maybe Matt Lauer, who I know is a friend, might still be in your future. And once again, I know you can't go into any detail, but it's sort of a nice idea to think that you could reacquaint yourself with Matt and do something if he were to leave the Today Show.
Well, Matt and I, there's somebody who would watch.
Right. That's one.
That's one, yeah. You know, Matt and I are very good friends, and I have the utmost respect and affection for Matt. I think he is the consummate professional, and I certainly enjoyed all our years together. But I'm sort of figuring out what I'm going to do. Matt is appropriately committed to the Today Show, which is, you know, such a position of honor in the TV landscape, if you will. And so there's no plans right now, and the speculation's sort of interesting and amusing and fun and all that. But you know, he's got a job, and I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do.
Very good. I think we have time for a few questions from the audience. Sir.
Hi.
Wait, there's a microphone coming down. If
Oh, we
you
got
wait,
a Phil Donahue here.
Wait half a second.
You guys are too young, probably,
Right.
to remember Phil Donahue.
I'm old enough.
Good.
Matt was at CAU and I was at CAU in Philly.
Oh.
And actually we did the Welcome Back Katie campaign years ago.
Oh, after I had Carrie or Ellie, or
Yes.
Ellie, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, by
So-
Carrie, it was like, yeah, whatever.
So thank you for being here and as relaxed as you were then. Here's the question. What if there were a Katie Couric, I'm connecting the dots, Katie Couric, Pay It Forward, best advice I ever got because Edward R. Murrow and Fred Friendly believed in small stories and sharing them. So what if there were a social network that involved people sharing their small stories?
You know, funny you should mention that, because...
I'm not a plant, by the way.
No, I mean, I'm so busy doing a lot of things, you know, reporting and obviously doing the evening news, and I have no idea how I had time to kind of do this. But I thought about doing a website that would sort of live on and people could contribute to. And I think, you know, that's something I'd still be interested in doing at some point down the road, just because I think that's obviously how people get their information. And I love sort of the interactive element with people telling their personal stories, because I think they could have a lot to contribute to something like this, because there are a lot of people who aren't well known who have also lived extraordinary lives.
One or two more. I see a hand up in the back.
Hi. So you were talking about eyewitness reporting, and you mentioned Lara Logan sort of briefly, and I wanted to ask further about, she suffered a brutality that was well noted, and the essay that Lindsay Addario, the Times reporter who was held in captivity in Libya, wrote. So talking about the arguably paternalistic conversation that's emerged about female reporters in these sort of dangerous situations. And so I wanted to ask you more about your experience as a female reporter in these dangerous situations, and specifically as a white female reporter, and how these different locations have affected your experience both positively and negatively.
I think that, you know, personally, I can only speak for myself, but personally, I have not sort of, I mean, I think in Saudi Arabia, when the morality police chased me and tried to hit me with sticks because I think my ankles were exposed, that was sort of unsettling, and women couldn't drive, obviously, and can't drive in Saudi Arabia. That, to me, was sort of the most palpable and flagrant incident of really feeling that my gender was affecting my ability to move freely, but still not to report, you know, and so I've been very fortunate. You know, I've been to Afghanistan and Iraq and been able to move about freely and talk to soldiers. I've worked at the Pentagon, which was pretty male dominated when I was there. And so I have to say that I've had a good experience, and I think these comments that somehow women shouldn't be reporting on these stories are just bogus, because for every incident of violence against a woman, you also have a Danny Pearl, or you have the New York Times reporters. And so I think it's kind of a red herring, and I think that I just respect anybody who puts their lives who will put his or her life in danger and go to a war zone. And whether it's David Bloom, who was a good friend of mine at NBC, who died covering you know, the war in Iraq. I mean, I think that sometimes, you know, the press, as a lot of institutions a lot of people are losing trust in some of our major institutions in this country, whether it's, you know, the political system, the judicial system, the press. And I think, you know, sometimes we have to realize that it's critically important to have a free press. We saw what happens in countries like Egypt that has only state-run media, and how social media was able to get around that. And Robert Gates even said to us, you know, we were sort of chatting on the plane on the way back from Iraq, and he's, you know, somebody asked him how he felt about the press, and I was like, oh God, incoming. And he said, you know, I really appreciate what you all do. He really fought to have MRAPs for all the troops, which cost $1 million a piece, were not an easy sell for the Army. He said, I knew about MRAPs because of something I read in the paper about that the Marines had them and that they were saving lives. So, you know, I think not me necessarily at all, but a lot of these people who are risking their lives to find out the truth for people, that we owe them some gratitude for doing that. And sometimes we forget in this age of cynicism that these people really care deeply about their jobs and are really committed to getting the critical information out to the public.
One more question? It's right here. Wait 1 second. No.
Oh.
I'm sorry. If we have time, we'll get back to this lady right here. And here comes the microphone.
My question is this. We talk about the social media, and my concern is how shortened much of the reporting has become. And I wondered if you'd comment on that in terms of content as well as implications. Thanks.
Yeah, I worry about that as well. I think, you know, the constant stimulation and the distractions and the multitasking that we've all, I think, succumbed to in one way or another are really detrimental to, I think, really absorbing important information. I find that my attention span has gotten shorter, and I feel sort of peripatetic and restless when I'm reading something that may be, you know, more than 2 paragraphs. Not always. I just read this fantastic article in Rolling Stone that you guys should read about this kill squad in Afghanistan, which was really, really upsetting. But I am concerned about that, and I think that hopefully everyone can have the self-discipline to roll up their sleeves, but I think, you know, and really dig into a subject. But we all live very hectic lives, and I don't know about you, sometimes I feel overwhelmed with the amount of information that's at our fingertips. And you don't know where to start. You know, I don't know how people are able to ingest it all. I don't know if they spend 5 hours in front of the computer, but most of us are busy. We have to go to class. We have to go to our jobs. We have to take care of children or elderly parents. I mean, you know, we have to live. And so, you know, I think we're still struggling with how do you be an informed citizen and absorb all the material out there and what you need to know, and how do you separate the wheat from the chaff and the accurate from the opinion. And so I think it's a real challenge, but I share your concerns totally.
One last question. I think we have a student up top there.
Thank you. Katie, I want to thank you so much for the advice and insight you've provided us all today. And I wanted to ask, you know, I'm a Peace and Justice Studies major at Tufts, and we talk about the media, especially the mainstream media, as really contributing to the status quo and the popular image of certain sectors of society. And I wanted to know how you see, you know, especially the mainstream media, which you've been such an integral part of, as contributing to sort of promoting social justice and equality in this country?
Well, that's something that I care deeply about and have tried to do, at every possible turn. Clearly, editorial choices have been made, whether it's, I think everybody brings his or her particular sensibility to a job. And so through the years, if there's a problem with sexual assault, for example, in the military, I say this is a really important issue. Now, it may not be important to my colleague sitting next to me, but it's something that's important to me. So it's something that I have tried to have inform my choices, inform the decisions I make and the attention I give to certain issues. And so I think a lot of people do that. I think the mainstream media has been sort of, for some reason, it's been tarnished. Sort of the whole idea of the mainstream media has been sort of spoken in a pejorative way. And I think the mainstream media does a lot of really important work. And I think that you have a lot of people who care about a lot of important issues and are trying to shed light on them and, really think about it and take it seriously every day.
This has been wonderful. Thank you all so much for coming, and please join me in welcoming and thanking once again Jonathan Tisch and Katie Couric.